Good afternoon, and welcome. When I got in my car this morning and drove from Roseland, New Jersey, which isn't all that far, and I was driving in this weather, and I said, of all the days to have a snowstorm. And then I got here, and I said, I'm looking at these chairs, and I said, this isn't going to work out so well. And thank the Lord, I'm wrong. Because if you look around and you see all the people, that brave the storm, which is a big deal, I think, all for Barbara and Skip, it just is a testament to the type of people that they were. So, but I want to thank you personally anyway, because it's such a joy for me to see that so many people took the effort to come on out on a day like today. I just want to tell you a bit before I start about where we are. This is called the Kellogg Club, and it was owned by the Kellogg family in Morristown. And no, it's not the cereal company. Okay. When the last Kellogg member died, the community got together and purchased the house because they didn't want the mansion torn down. So they thought that they would use it as a place for gathering. And in 1968, it was incorporated. The people fixed whatever needed to be fixed, because it is an old building. There's a pool out there, and they still continue to enjoy it. I selected this place because Lois Densky's a member, and she has an in here. But in addition to that, if you were at Skip and Barbara's wedding, it was at the Unitarian Church, which was also an old building, very similar to this. So I felt that it's like kind of the same type of feeling. So that's why we're here, and that's what this is. And my name is Gary Haberman. I'm a music composer, performer, and producer. Skip Tullen was one of my closest friends. And when he married Barbara, she became one of my closest friends. After Skip passed in June of this year, I suggested to Barbara that we plan some sort of memorial. And I told her to take her time because she wasn't feeling so well herself. And when she was ready, we talked about the type of celebration we would have for Skip. And she was an active participant. We should do this, we should do that. But little did we know at the time that she wouldn't be here to join us for such a celebration. So Lois Densky-Wolf, Barbara Guilford, and I decided to make this gathering a double celebration for the lives of both Skip and Barbara. And I'd like to thank both Lois and Barbara Guilford for helping me organize this remembrance in words, music, and refreshment. And now I have the privilege of sharing some thoughts about my close friend, Skip Tullen. Skip had the intellect of Bertrand Russell and the vocabulary of William F. Buckley Jr. He possessed an extraordinarily moral compass and had an uncommon compassion for his fellow humankind. A true Renaissance man, Skip's interests were encompassed in a cornucopia of music, science, electronics, art, literature, theater, current events, and politics. He was prodigious amongst his peers and dispatched all of these qualities with vigor in his daily life. Skip grew up in Massapequa, Long Island. He was the son of David and Rose Tullen. David, his father, worked at the Columbia Broadcasting Company, CBS, as a broadcast assistant to the legendary Edward R. Murrow, and probably a precursor to his interest in recording and broadcasting. Skip became a licensed ham radio operator in his teens. After high school, he earned a doctorate from Columbia University, after which he moved to Morristown in the late 60s, becoming a professor of physics, science, and engineering at the newly formed County College of Morris, where he became department chair. Coincidentally, both Skip and I were at the crossroads in our careers, pursuing our life's passions at full-time vocations when we met. For Skip, it was operating a recording studio and working as a master recording engineer. Mine was continuing as a full-time composer, musician, and producer. Skip designed and built Tullen Sound Recording upon leaving County College of Morris. I met Skip in the summer of 1980 when someone suggested that I drop by to observe him run a recording session. It was close to home. I was running to New York to work. This would have been a 20-minute drive and no tolls. So Skip had just set up his first studio. Everything was in the basement at his home at 26 Altamont Court. The layout consisted of two parts. There were two rooms, a recording console encased in a double glass so he could see the other room, which wasn't that much bigger, and that was the area where the performers were. Meeting Skip for the first time was like bumping into a character from a Frank Capra movie. I was afraid that if I walked upstairs into the kitchen, I'd be warmly greeted by Donna Reed in a gingham apron. But at the time, there was no woman upstairs. I took stock of this man beside me, the vocabulary, the immaculate diction, the Errol Flynn pencil mustache set above his lips. Staring at him for a few minutes, and I was listening to the performers, and then one of the performers got a little antsy. As they say in the business, she was getting her diva on. Skip turned to me. Now, he doesn't really know me all that well. He turned to me and whispered, "Recalcitrant." I never heard such a word used in a recording session. Who uses such words in everyday vocabulary? Who amongst us consistently pronounces white as white? First impressions can be overwhelming. His enterprise, Tullen Sound Recording, attracted a niche market of clientele. He recorded local choruses, such as Harmonium and Morris Choral Society, along with a multitude of both professional and amateur musicians and personalities, including Dudley Moore, Wynton Marsalis, or Skip would say, Wynton. Don't forget the T, Gary. Joe Piscopo, John Hendricks, Dave Brubeck, as well as local instrumental and vocal professional musicians. When the big recording studios were closing due to the advent of computerized home recording and rising rents, Tullen Sound Recording continued to grow. His largest client was educational publisher Silver Burdett & Ginn of Morristown. It was this client that drew Skip and I into a creative team of original music, recording, and production. We started out with small projects for Silver Burdett, which continued to grow into much larger assignments. Multimedia educational packages became the rage of the 1980s. Educational publishers began to incorporate videos and audio cassettes and other media into their book sales. So was born the interactive teaching, or ITKIT. It was first to make its way into the classrooms of America, and we recorded it all at Tullen Sound Recording. Over the course of 2 years, we created and recorded over 2 hours of original soundtracks for videos and over 125 original and popular music from a wide range of genres. Skip and I spent hours together in and out of the studio, and that's where we really got to know each other. There were so many things that impressed me about Skip Tullen. His interests were nothing short of Da Vincian in scope, and he had a passion for every single subject that tickled his fancy. Skip's knowledge of science, physics, and electronics was staggering, and at any time in the course of a conversation, if you gave him the opportunity, he would wow you with a complete and detailed explanation of a particular point. You've been there. To enhance his gargantuan kingdom of interest, Skip was also a collector. In fact, collector doesn't even begin to describe the museum of assorted stuff he amassed and stored in every nook, cranny, and eave at 26 Altamont. He had a doctrine of collecting. It was One was never enough. There were over 32 ham radios of various vintages from the 60s into the next century. Every kind of ham radio antenna from tower-esque to portable. There were grandfather clocks, wall clocks, watches, replica models of P-47 Lightning warplanes, like this. He had 7 of these things hanging on fish hooks in his area where he had all the ham radios. Also about 20 books about this plane. He had radio-controlled cars, hundreds of visual meters that measured everything from the amount of voltage in a circuit to the amount of radioactive material in an object. And yes, I'm speaking about Geiger counters. Skip had 17 Geiger counters. Because one is never enough. In fact, when Barbara went off to the hospital for a nuclear scan, Mr. Tellin would bring along his portable Geiger counter. He'd wait for the nuclear dye to enter her body and then began a demonstration for the benefit of the hospital technicians, scanning her body as the thing started chirping like crazy. There were huge antiquated vacuum tubes that you'd see in televisions and ham radios. In his office, there was an 8-foot slide rule hanging above the door with over 20 regular ones. Skip was the president of the slide rule club in high school. No surprise there. There were AM/FM radios of every size and shape and decade. There were over 40 teddy bears, a gross of small LED flashlights. He also collected the palladium uranium glassware. In fact, when I got there after we started going through the stuff, there were unopened boxes of things he never got around to open. I could continue, but you get the picture. George Carlin created a comedy piece about people and their stuff. So I wonder if at one time or another he ever met Skip Tallon. Skip was an extremely compassionate individual. He was one of those people who listened both with his eyes as well as his ears when you spoke to him. I can tell you the time that he was so moved by a particular performance or a musical composition that someone was either performing in his studio or performing in a concert that he was recording, that it brought him to tears. It was these qualities that endeared him to most clients, both professional and amateur, but especially the student musicians who came to the studio. As you can imagine, the recording process can be quite intimidating at first, but Skip had a way of putting young musicians at ease and comfortable, which enabled them to record their very best performances. He was always encouraging and positive, regardless of the level of talent. One of these students that stuck in my mind was named Brannon Cho, a cellist who possessed an exceptional musical gift. I remember after this young man came into the recording, to the studio to record for the first time and he left, Skip called me right on the phone. He says, "You gotta come here and listen to this." So I invited Mr. Cho to speak this afternoon, sent him an email, and this is the reply that I got. "Dear Mr. Haberman, thank you for reaching out to me with your thoughtful invitation. I'm very saddened to hear of Skip's passing. There are many fond memories of the work we made together more than a decade ago. His top quality sounds and warm-hearted professionalism will always stay with me. I'm very sorry to let you know that I have moved to Germany recently and will be stuck here for concerts during the time of the celebration. Otherwise, I would have loved to participate in the event. Please send my condolences to his wife, and I will be there in spirit. All the best, Brannon." Unfortunately, Barbara got to read this reply. Those that knew Skip know that he chose the absolute perfect mate in Barbara Shallot. She shared many of his interests and tolerated his incessant proclivity for collecting things. Together, they created a loving 30-year partnership that complemented one another. When Skip's illness took a turn for the worse, and there was an opportunity to visit a specialist at Yale University Hospital in Connecticut, Skip told me, "I have an absolutely wonderful partner and will do anything I can to remain here as long as I can." Unfortunately for us, that didn't work out. I spent a great deal of time with Skip in his final days. I can tell you he lived each one of those days with the same predilection of dignity and grace that accompanied him every day of his life. I once had a conversation with my youngest daughter, who at the time was distressed by the fact that she just lost her grandmother and grandfather in a period of a few months. I told her that people most important in our lives who leave us with good feelings never really leave. They remain in our hearts and our minds forever. And Skip was one of those folks, and he will be remembered and cherished by many, which is a testament to you folks who came out today. Finally, I'd like to speak about art and sculpture, since this was a favorite subject of both Skip and Barbara. During the heyday of the Roman Empire, there were two philosophies of sculpture. One school of thought that when a piece was finished, it was rubbed in fine wax to mitigate the imperfections of the stone. The other perspective was to leave the stone as is, leaving the final sculpture and all its little imperfections exactly the way it was. However, the artist, many of these pieces, stamped out the words "sine cera," without wax, underneath the sculpture. This phrase, "sine cera," evolved into the English word sincere. There is no better word to describe Skip Tullen, for that word says it all. Thank you. It's my privilege now to introduce you to Anne Matlack, who is the director of the choral group Harmonium.
I'm going to have Harmonium go ahead and get up and prepare for singing, because I think Gary really said everything. But he did ask me to say a few words, so here's what I want to say. Skip was a true gentleman in an old-fashioned kind of way. Always, Somebody's
You're a sound engineer there?
Oh, really? Oh, we're good. Yep.
That's why we always skip.
He was always kind, respectful, thorough, and polite. He was sweet and happy to see you. Whether I was in his recording studio with my students or my daughter making college auditions, which is dramatic for the mother anyway, or once my children's choir got to record in the studio, which was a huge thrill for them, he always made you feel listened to and supported. So, to Harmonium, Skip was much more than our recording engineer and our magic worker when it came to editing. That's why there's so many here today in the snow. Another colleague, she's here right now, wrote, "To know Skip, just watch him during a harmonium dress rehearsal, impeccably taping his wires to the floor, adjusting the tall microphones or his headphones to a more exquisite spot, responding candidly and personally to the depth of choral music and text, the community of singers in front of him, the unexpected noise distractions, and most of all, to beauty revealed through sound." Very articulate. Skip really, really listened and appreciated our music, and I wouldn't feel like I had succeeded unless we made him cry in a concert, and that was mentioned. And really, I mean, it was really important to us, and we almost always did, because he listened with so much heart and soul, and we tried to sing that way. So this piece we're about to sing in his honor is called "Where There Is Light in the Soul." It's by Elizabeth Alexander, and it's a setting of a Chinese proverb. Where there is light in the soul, there will be beauty in the person. Where there is beauty in the person, there will be harmony in the home. Where there is harmony in the home, there will be honor in the nation. Where there is honor in the nation, there will be peace in the world.
And now I'd like to call upon Linda Bear in Remembering Barbara Shaw.
So I never used the microphone.
That's all right. Just like that.
Okay.
That's it. You got it.
So, Barbara. So I was talking to Lois and I said, what is a niche? And she said, it's a really good guy. So I looked it up online, Lois, and it's a person of integrity and honor. And that was truly what Barbara was. And then she married Skip, who was a man of integrity and honor. And they were a blast. They really were. I met Barbara at the Commission for the Blind. She was a teacher of the blind. I was running the computer system, and you might not think that was really compatible, but she came to work for me for a very brief time doing program evaluation of the education program. She didn't last long because it was too boring for her, and she went back to teaching the blind, but we became fast friends. And so we were both single, you know, and we were talking about, you know, anything, I remember thinking, married, that kind of thing. And she came to me one morning, first thing in the morning, and she said, Linda, I had a blind date with the most interesting man. And when she opened her front door to come to work, she found a dozen roses for me. And you know, she said, huh, this requires consideration. And she was just a ball. She could make the most mundane thing, like going out to lunch, to be a really joyful event. And then so then they started going out, hello. And within a year, I think, they were married. And he was a male barber, truly. They were like this. They were so simpatico. They both could talk about anything. And if they didn't know about it, they would ask a zillion questions. And, no iPhones then, so you couldn't look it up right away. And they would get to the bottom of it. And it was just more fun to go out for a social occasion with them. So at any rate, they started coming to our house routinely for dinner. And so we live up in Sussex County. My husband is Joel Weinberg. We live in a lake community. And they would come there almost once a week, and we would sit on the porch, and we'd drink wine. So at any rate, when the man next door, who had not been up in a couple of years, came up one day, my husband just kind of trotted over and said, hey, what are you doing? How are you this day? And the man said that his wife had become so ill, she couldn't manage the steps up and down because the lake house was really down on the side of the hill. So Joel called Skip immediately when he got home. And he said, the house next door is available. Skip came up within an hour, and he bought the house that day. So then, for years, they came up in the nice weather, almost every weekend. And it was just the warmest kind of feeling to know that Barbara and Skip would be here that night. And almost always they had dinner with us on Friday nights. And then, of course, in the summer of 2018, Skip could no longer do that because he couldn't come down and up those steps. And we miss them to this day. We miss that kind of wonderful friendship, whereas, Gary was saying, Skip could talk about anything. He had a source of knowledge that he didn't care much for, like, popular events that were going on, but give him a book about mechanics or history or politics, and he was on it. And together, they were perfect together. They were a remarkable couple. I never heard them complain about each other. I never heard them with a downward kind of smile one to another. They really treasured each other. They knew what they had found. Okay, and last but not least, have you ever met a couple with more friends than Barbara and Skip? I mean, it's just amazing. Everyone loved them. And everyone was heartbroken when Skip died and then Barbara died. And so truly, it's even hard to talk about it now, even though it's been a while. But I will always miss them. I mean, I'm still thinking every other day, I gotta call Barbara, And the sense of loss that I'm sure we all feel is very real, and we will remember them forever. Dear friends, thank you very much.
Now I'd like to call upon a colleague, Debbie Bloomer.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. In 2018, when my husband was at the CNI in training with his new dog, Barbara visited, and she told us at the time that her first experience with people who were blind was there at the CNI, where she was a waitress in the restaurant as a teenager. And I thought at the time, and still think, what an auspicious beginning of a decades-long career that had a positive impact on countless students and their families. Barbara and I worked together at the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired for many years, where we were both teachers. Her skill and tenacity for solving difficult challenges was unmatched. Most of us would try to avoid challenging situations at work, but not Barbara. She was right there, trying to figure out a solution. As one former student put it, Barbara was going to make sure that I learned the material and passed my high school chemistry class. She was talented both artistically and musically, and she used her creativity to encourage her students, particularly those who were learning Braille. She even decorated her cubicle at her office to make the environment more homey and inviting. And many of us visited that cubicle because Barbara was such a font of knowledge that we often had questions and came for advice. And no matter how busy she was, she would take some time to address our concern and offer her wisdom. One coworker whose cubicle was next to Barbara's told me that when Barbara heard her on the phone with a call that sounded stressful, as soon as the call was over, Barbara would walk over with a cup of tea. Her focus was always on instilling confidence in her students and encouraging their success. When management at the Commission for the Blind came up with a policy that Barbara thought was counterproductive and ridiculous, she would tell them her opinion in no uncertain terms. And if she felt that no one listened, she would tell them again and again. Her work with people who are blind didn't stop at retirement. She volunteered as a reader for an adult, and she was a tireless supporter of the National Federation of the Blind of New Jersey. She participated in national and state conventions, and she was co-editor of the NFBNJ newsletter, The Sounding Board, for many years. She was the head teacher in our Bell program, which was a learning and literacy program for children, for 3 years. When she was too ill to do it the 4th year, she took it upon herself to find a replacement, who she mentored and advised throughout the program. Barbara was a true friend. Just a few examples. I would be here all day if I went through all the kindness and thoughtful things that Barbara did during the long course of our friendship. A few examples were that when I was diagnosed with a medical problem and I told Barbara about it, she did research on conventional and alternative treatment possibilities. And when I was on a special diet, she sent recipes. She even cooked meals with some of those recipes so that I could try them. When my husband was at the Seeing Eye in training with his dogs, Barbara and Skip would invite me to stay at their house for weekends to make it easier for me to go back and forth and visit him on Saturdays and Sundays. They were both wonderful hosts, making sure that I had food that I liked and that met my dietary requirements medically. Those are just a few examples of wonderful things that Barbara did. And on my last text to her, I said that I would miss our stories, laughs, and interesting discussions, and that she would always be in my heart.
Unfortunately, we lost two of our speakers this afternoon, and they were both former students. However, one of them sent me an email and said, would you please read what I wrote for Barbara? And this is Tim Coker. So here is his email, and I'm going to call upon the person that always bails me out, my wife, Rosemary Haberman, who agreed to read Tim's speech.
Thank you. Forgive me, I haven't had a chance to read through this one. Tim says, Gary, thanks again for organizing everything. Below are my remarks. I first met Barbara when I started 8th grade. I was new to Jersey, so she made it part of her job to teach me where everything was around Morristown. Post office, hobby shop, Blimpies. They relocated, but I found that one too. She also made sure I had all the low vision tools and that my teachers understood the best ways to help me learn. Now, I didn't always make things easy. In English, we read Romeo and Juliet. Kids were in groups of 4 or 5 making models of the Globe Theater or a paper on Elizabethan living. Me, I had to make a movie. It was called The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, a comedy. I'm trying to imagine this. Barbara read the script, laughed a lot, probably to boost my ego, and suggested we act it out live to save time. Of course she was right, but I was Scorsese. Plus, I wanted to use the theatrical knives and all the fake blood I bought at Dell's Novelty. Naturally, it was submitted late, but we got an A for effort and possibly a PG-13 rating. 13 years pushing the limit. She remained my counselor all through high school, and I have to say, I don't think I ever met another person who was such a deep well of information. In any situation, she had suggestions. She had suggestions even without the situation. Because I loved live theater, she got me signed up with a group that offers seats right up close for visually impaired to Broadway shows, a service I still use this day. And she was incredibly dedicated. I remember she'd broken her leg skiing, but never missed an appointment. She came on crutches, but she came on time. And she personally tutored me in French, a tough subject for me, for 2 years, until I told that class au revoir. When I went to college, I got a different counselor, but she kept tabs on me, and we'd do social things with friends. And one day she called up and said, I want you to meet my new boyfriend. I think you guys would hit it off. And they were Skip, a recording engineer. I'd been thinking about recording my punk band, so this was like walking into a dream. I thought my brother would be waking me up saying, dude, it's noon. Of course, Skip and I did hit it off. They got married, one of those perfect for each other unions. I'd call up and talk to Barbara, latest news or plan something, and then I'd say, is Skip there? And we'd have an entirely different conversation. I remember once he told me about an editing project where a singer he'd recorded couldn't get it in one take. So he had spliced the good parts from 4 or 5 takes into a finished product, but so precisely that he might be cutting in the middle of a word and pasting a good section from another take. And I was working on a similar editing job, except he was working with opera, and I was editing bootlegs of the Runaways. He knew who they were. Completely gracious with his time, always willing to listen to something I'd recorded or explain some technology to me. Once I called asking if he knew how to get rid of the pops, crackle, and hiss that old vinyl records have after they've played 1 billion times. He said, yeah, I know how to do that. You know how many people in the world would have even known what I was talking about? And how to fix it? And that was Skip. We were going somewhere once, and he'd come in, and like a magnet, bam, went right to my stereo and said, "Oh, nobody has speakers like this anymore." And I just want to say, Skip, if you're listening, and I think you are, I got a new pair of speakers, and they're even cooler than those, but I bet you've seen them. And I bet you and Barbara are back listening to some pretty great music together again. I want to close by just saying thank you to Barbara and Skip. I know my life was enriched in so many ways just by knowing them and being able to call them my friends. And I'm sure Tim speaks for all of us.
It's time for me to call upon another former student, Amy Alvin.
So, hi, I'm Amy Alvin. I knew Barbara Shallot because she was my Braille teacher, or teacher of the blind, in 7th and 8th grade, which is like 7-8 years ago now. And she would come, and she was always on time, and she really helped me with a lot of the things I was struggling with geometry in particular. She would bring different drawing kits to draw different shapes and to teach me how to draw shapes, feel shapes, because that's always something that I've had a hard time with reading graphs. And another thing that we worked on a lot was signing my name. I don't know how many times, she would come and tell me, "This is how you write an A, it's a rectangle, let's do it," over and over and over, and I would mess up, but she kept at it, and actually, she, and I think Skip, actually made me a signature guide that I can use. It's like a template for me to sign my name. Barbara Shallot was one of the most intelligent teachers that I've known, and but she was more than just a teacher, because when she retired, she took me to concerts in Carnegie Hall. And she would take me with Skip in the car. We would have conversations about music and our favorite classical composers and statistics and pretty much anything intellectual. And I really, really miss them. But when Barbara Shallot became ill, and I knew that I wouldn't see her very, very much anymore, I wrote her a poem, and I went to her house and read it to her. And this was in the summer. And she said, "Amy, this is something that I will cherish." And that was the last time I saw her. So I'm going to read the poem. Just turn the paper around, there you go. It's called "The Love You Share Will Always Be There." You are my earth, like solid ground, your character firm, your wisdom sound. My feet are planted on this earth, ready to walk to a new destination. You are my fire, whose heart burns bright. Your knowledge guides me to know what's right. I light a candle in your name, filled with admiration. You are my water, adapting to me. You take the shape of whatever I need. A lake of study principles and an ocean of ideas flowing. You are my air who gives me room, like a flower to bud and bloom. And when I'm lost, I stop and breathe, then I know where I'm going. My earth, fire, water, and air, the love you share will always be there.
This is Patty Dunham. Patty and I have worked together for over 30 years, and a lot of that time was in Tullet Sound Recording, doing all the music for Silver Burdette and Ginn. We also recorded 2 CDs at Skips, and Barbara had asked us to do something at Skips Memorial, which is now Skips and Barbara's Memorial. So we ran through all the songs that we thought they'd like, and then I ran across Amy's poem. So I thought the most appropriate thing for me to do is set this poem to music. So that's what we're going to do. Patty's going to sing Amy's poem set to the music that I wrote. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Patty. She is sung with Filled with Glass. She's one of those people that are comfortable in different genres of music. She could sing in a jazz club. She also could sing with the New York Philharmonic as part of the New York Choral Artists. Whenever there's a big chorus of singers at the Philharmonic, Patty's one of those singers. So it's my privilege to introduce Patty Dunham. Jerry.
You are my earth, like solid ground. Your character firm, your wisdom sound. My feet are planted on this earth, ready to walk to a new destination.
So that concludes our memorial service. Again, I'd like to thank you for coming and invite you all to please join us for some refreshment and perhaps continue your discussion about Barbara and Skip. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.